This video is sponsored by Bespoke Post. More on them later. For decades, game developers have toiled for an effective way of extracting every last ounce of value out of their creations. It's just good sense and practical time management to increase the worth of what you've already got without having to expend time and energy and, let's be honest, money creating something new. And the easiest way of making a game worth more is to increase its replayability. Or I guess you could deliberately understock it to artificially inflate the price among retailers and scalpers. That's always a fun one. Now though, replayability is king and has been for ages, and a great way of keeping people playing your game is to crank the difficulty up and watch people cry their eyes out at some impossibly hard boss fights. There's some beauty to well-constructed, crazy difficult boss fights that I've been obsessed with for years. It's like a shared experience that you can discuss with other players, like some kind of group therapy session. Hi, my name is RabbidLuigi and I'm terrible at video games apparently. Where did it all go so wrong? At some point you do start to question why we struggle through such huge spikes in difficulty, but you cannot underestimate the euphoria and the sense of reward you get from finally overcoming a really difficult boss fight. It kind of reminds me a little bit of today's sponsors Bespoke Post and how they offer monthly memberships to you where they will send you some really cool items from smaller brands that also helps to support those small businesses. So you can get a hunting knife and help out some guy's small business. That's pretty cool. As someone who runs their own small business, Bespoke Post really resonates with me. They purchase 90% of their products from small businesses, most of which are US based, like how this Damascus steel knife in the Forge box is made by Buck and Bear Knives, who operate out of Pennsylvania. And then Bespoke Post take these products and ship them out to their members every month. The retail value in every box is around about $70, but will only set you back $45, so you're getting a discount on all these unique items, and the lineup is constantly changing every month, so you're very likely to find something that appeals to you. You can preview your mystery box before it's shipped out and decide if you want to keep it, swap it for something else, or skip the month for no charge, so you're only ever paying for what you want. There's so much variety here, from clothing to hunting knives to the cooking utensils that I really like, and also this awesome Weekender canvas bag. It's crazy how much stuff they've found. If this all sounds amazing, then you're gonna love the deal Bespoke Post are running with me. And to get 20% off your first box, you need to click the link in the description and enter Rabbid20 at checkout, or you can go to bspk.me/Rabbid20. Thank you again to Bespoke Post for sponsoring this video. Anyway, I guess we need to get angry and sad at boss fights. RPGs are absolute fuckers when it comes to super hard boss fights. I don't want to say RPGs don't require skill, because they do. You need to think very strategically to overcome more challenging opponents, but there is also a technical limit to how much damage your characters can do. This can sometimes make RPGs hard to balance, since a player could easily grind up and sweep through the rest of the game, but also, those super bosses can get very gnarly if the developer is feeling sadistic enough. Well, as long as they're super bosses, I reckon we'll be alright, because I can then set my expectations accordingly, and not get wound up when I can't beat the fucking Emerald Weapon! What, it's this green robot that lives under the sea and can only be fought after Sephiroth starts fucking around with the planet as one of the world's defenses? Yeah, okay, I'll let you know when Sephiroth starts showing any interest in deep-sea diving. It's on his list of things to do, I'm sure. The Emerald Weapon is more than your conventional RPG super boss fight though, and considering that you're expected to be able to defeat Sephiroth by the end of Final Fantasy VII, I reckon that poor Sephi would end up a messy stain by the time Emerald Weapon was through with him, because Green Boy here is capable of handing out huge damage numbers that affect all members of your party at the same time, because of its Air Tam Storm attack thing that deals damage based on the amount of materia equipped by the party and then multiplied by 1,111. Considering the max amount of HP you can have is 9,999, this move is capable of taking a huge chunk of your party at best, and instantly killing them at worst if you happen to have a lot of materia. You could unequip them, but then you're losing out on the additional skills and boosted stats that they'll give you, and you kinda need them to overcome the 20-minute time limit because we are, after all, underwater. Hey, it's okay, you can just equip this underwater thing, and now there's no timer. Except it's a materia, so more damage against you. I think I'd just rather drown. Just in general.
I do like how video gamey the weapons are in Final Fantasy VII, because, you know, I know they're designed to be the great protectors of Earth who come out when, you know, there's some danger, but they're so obviously video game first and lore second, and I kind of love it for that. I also can't help but notice that we didn't see the Emerald weapon in the remake, or at least the first episode of it. You know, it's going to be a really fun day when that happens.
There's an interesting paradox with Soulsborne boss fights. You'd think that they're so consistently hard that of course you'd be seeing one on every list that talks about difficult boss fights, and because originality is dead, you invariably do. You can't kill as many players as this and not leave the kind of impression on someone that will inspire them to talk about hard boss fights, but at the same time, Dark Souls does a lot of legwork to prepare you for just how unforgiving its boss fights can be. So when I see people complaining about how hard Ornstein and Smough are, all I think is, like, that's kind of the point, and how they're about right for difficulty at this point in the game. By the same metrics, you'd imagine that a boss fight at the end of some DLC would be one of the hardest fights in the game, and you're absolutely right. It doesn't stop the boss fight from being a nightmare, but hey, it's Bloodborne. This thing's all about nightmares.
DLC is effectively an open invitation to let loose with some of the craziest difficulty you've ever seen in a video game, especially since any optional content that a player has to buy separately is already heavily scrutinized for potentially not being value for money. Matter of fact, an extra layer of difficulty can often provide an added incentive for certain franchises. I don't need to tell you that Dark Souls is absolutely one of those franchises, especially since Bloodborne was so reasonable with difficulty. You know, there's scope there to go a bit crazy, especially if we're fighting orphans. What?
Hey, it's fine, there's all this stuff in the lore about childbirth and wet nurses, and you need to find umbilical cords to fight the true final boss, so fighting the Orphan of Kos shouldn't be too surprising at this point. What will come as a shock is how utterly and completely this thing will destroy you, and how it kind of ignores the rules of Bloodborne. Yes and no, because Bloodborne is a little bit different to Dark Souls since you're rewarded for being more aggressive, and combat is less about dodging for 90% of the time and being a bit more proactive. It is very hard to be proactive with the Orphan of Kos since this thing swings its placenta around like a weapon, and despite its skeletal appearance, it attacks so relentlessly fast. Bloodborne in general doesn't punish mistakes too harshly because of how you can gain health back by quickly retaliating, but you don't get that chance with the Orphan of Kos since it has so many combos that dissolve even the strongest, bulkiest builds. The only strategy is to be aggressive and not to give him a moment's peace, because if he lands a strong enough hit on you and you hesitate, you'll be comboed into oblivion. It can be incredibly overwhelming at times, but you shouldn't expect anything else from the final boss of some DLC. Frankly, I'd be disappointed if it wasn't stupidly strong. Over 8 hours, says howlongtobeat.com, and most of it on this. I can still hear those screams. Now that Sora's finally made it into Smash Bros, everyone's got Kingdom Hearts on the brain. I'm down for it, since Sora's a great fit and basically the only way that the DLC could have ended, and besides, now everyone can calm down about how Sora needs to get into Smash Bros and focus on leaving Sakurai alone and stop asking him about the next Smash Bros game. Seriously, he can have all the time off if he wants and possibly retire. He doesn't owe anyone anything now. Besides, now he has loads of free time to play more Kingdom Hearts and can probably use some of it to complete the various cups in the game and unlock the most infamous boss fight that Kingdom Hearts has in its roster. With so many characters crossing over from Disney and Square Enix properties, it's no surprise that this game would want to use them to their strengths, and to put it simply, you don't make a game in 2002 that uses Final Fantasy characters without using stuff from Final Fantasy VII and inevitably Sephiroth. Yeah, he's back! No deep sea diving as of yet though. I don't want Emerald Weapon to go to waste. With the kind of stylish action that is so prevalent in Kingdom Hearts, a loud and proud boss fight against one of the most iconic sword users from the last 5 years preceding Kingdom Hearts 1 was always on the cards. Final Fantasy games kinda did him dirty, since you don't really get that sword duel between Cloud and Sephiroth, at least not until the remake, but Kingdom Hearts is more than happy to comply at the cost of making Sephiroth so talented at fighting that he'll make you look a fool inside 30 seconds. Really, he's kind of similar to the Orphan of Kos, except, you know, less weaponized placenta, since he has an attack style that hard punishes passive players and forces them to engage him close up. This is compounded further by Sephiroth having this meteor attack that can rack up damage very quickly without doing a lot, and he's basically invincible while using it, so you're forced into being more passive and wait for your opponent to strike back. I've never beaten Sephiroth without healing, and considering how heavily I have to lean on that, I'm lucky that Sephiroth hasn't got that ability too. The fight is somewhat doable because it's unfair in my favour. He comes back in the sequel with some more lines of dialogue, but he's not quite as challenging there. Music blows my mind, but I guess it always has, hasn't it? Now you can hear it and reenact the fight in Smash Bros. How the hell did that happen?
Raid bosses scare me, and they should scare you too, because it's one thing having to fight a boss fight on your own, but a whole different ballgame having to fight a way harder fight with a group of other individuals who may not all be pulling their weight. You know, you can grab all of the friends and acquaintances you can find, but if the devs have decided to be assholes beforehand, there's fuck all you can do about it.
I had a very exciting internal debate about whether or not I should include raid bosses in this video, because they do kind of ignore a lot of the rules of what a boss fight is. Not really something for the purists out there, but I do like how some online games keep you involved and allow you to have more of a direct impact on a raid boss. Skolas from Destiny technically isn't a raid boss, but he is a boss fight that you can't solo without a lot of prior prep time and knowledge ahead of time, and probably some luck and fancy exploits. Skolas is possible solo, but that's because Bungie have balanced the fight over time to be more fair and enjoyable, which was a necessity when it first came out because this guy was something else. Not just as a solo fight, but even as a group, you'd just die a bunch. And I didn't buy this game just to die a whole load. Skolas hasn't got anything too special for you, or at least he shouldn't have had any fancy moves, but when this launched in 2015, he had the Arc Burn modifier attached, which increases damage taken and given out by 300%. I suppose that's good news for hopeful players since you'll do more damage, but you'll also die very fast and have to whittle his giant health pool down all over again. Destiny is a first-person shooter, so it can be pretty hard avoiding being shot at by Skolas and all of his friends who turn up for the event Skolas' Revenge. Yeah, this is a gauntlet that throws 6 waves of enemies at you before finally unleashing this superpowered boss at you, who you can only damage by disabling these mines and making use of the 20-second window you now have to damage him in. It's a grueling, unforgiving challenge that players struggled with for weeks before Bungie admitted that Skolas wasn't supposed to have Arc Burn, and so they nerfed him and made the fight a lot more tolerable. But damn, for a few weeks there, Skolas was close to unbeatable, even with more players along for the ride. Can't say this game doesn't have content now. Alright, so listen, Final Fantasy is fucking crazy with boss fights. It's not a franchise known for difficult fights in the same way as Dark Souls, but I reckon it's the only franchise that really leans into that whole you can only be so strong in an RPG thing that I talked about earlier, because it's true! There is a limit to how much damage you dish out, and if you have a boss that is throwing back dangerously high damage numbers, then you're in for a tricky time, my friend. Oh, but how about we combine that horrifying concept with the same MMO style of raiding like in Destiny, where it's okay to make bosses with absurdly massive health bars because you're attacking it as a group, and if you're struggling, go get a bigger group. And so we come to a screeching, shuddering halt at the feet of Final Fantasy XI, which would be a game that I'd forget existed if my sister didn't play it a ton when we were growing up. She never got as far as the Pandemonium Warden, who has an outstanding name, but is infamously known as one of only 2 boss fights in this game to be nerfed after launch. However, whereas Skolas was nigh on impossible because of an oversight, Pandemonium Warden was designed from the start to be some insane endgame challenge. Though I gotta say, I don't think the devs thought this through very well, because they gave the Warden so much HP that it takes literal hours to defeat it. And I wish that was the end of it. You may remember that Final Fantasy XI is an online game and that I'm in the middle of this whole shtick about raid bosses, and so you need to realise that this fight was designed to be taken down by an entire party of people, all at high levels for this strong super boss. In theory, that's fine, but Pandemonium Warden is so impossibly powerful that it doesn't take hours to complete, it takes most of a day! When it was first introduced, more than 36 players banded together to take it down as a party, and after 18 hours, were forced to retire after members of the party began to fall ill and faint because they had spent the last 18 hours sitting down playing a video game virtually non-stop. That's not a great idea at the best of times, but considering the boss fight's design practically encouraged them to do so, of course Square Enix had to intervene and shave down the difficulty by a massive amount for this boss fight to be beatable and also, like, not dangerous? They had to add a disclaimer that users could see when logging in that states that Square Enix does not wish to see lives suffer as a result of extensive play. They made a boss fight so hard it hurt people in real life. Talk about overachieving. Fuck.
The Pandemonium Warden is another example of people suffering from marathoning video games, which is sadly something which has a couple of very high profile cases about it. But unlike the others, where they're self-imposed challenges, this boss fight couldn't really have been defeated any faster, which is honestly one of the wildest things I think I've ever heard. This is RabbidLuigi, and if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and if you want to see something right now, there's a video here about the scariest moments in all of the Metroid games. I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Sarah Malion, and AJ887. Thank you for watching, and don't play video games until you spew!